Hi again. I want to take a minute to talk to you now about content of your paper, which in many ways is probably the most important part of your literary analysis because it's really kind of the bread and butter of what we're talking about. So I want to show you an example of a successful literary analysis and that you can kind of take notes and see what this student has done. This is an example of a well-organized paper that gets to the point, and it's going to hit a lot of the points that I'm going to be talking about. So first of all, I want to just mention that right here we've got our introductory paragraph. The first sentence here it starts broad, right? So what we want to do when we start a paper for an introductory paragraph is we want to start broad, and then we want to gradually get narrower as the paragraph goes on. And we're going to kind of end with a thesis being kind of the most specific. So we've started here by opening up the topic of marriage. And you'll note that this paper does not talk about marriage as a topic, but it talks about marriage specifically within the texts that this person is going to be discussing, which is Death of a Salesman and then A Raisin in the Sun. So that's very important. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then we sort of introduce each text that we'll be talking about. So she introduces Death of a Salesman by Arthur Miller, and she introduces A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry. So we know which texts we're talking about, who wrote them, and we just get sort of a few sentences of context. We make it down here to our thesis statement, and this thesis is going to be the roadmap for the rest of the paper. So it's very important that you set up a thesis that is specific and that is argumentative, meaning it's making an argument or a claim that actually someone could easily argue the opposite. So we want to kind of put something out there that is bold. You don't want to play it safe when it comes to a thesis. You don't want to just state a fact because that's something that everyone could agree with. You want to say something that perhaps someone could disagree with. So here's an example of a thesis. Despite the fact that Ruth Younger and Linda Lohman serve as the emotional centers of their respective families, only Ruth is able to do so without hiding her true feelings and opinions from her husband. While both plays contain marriages that are wrought with dysfunction, Walter and Ruth are unlike Willie and Linda because they are able to experience the necessary confrontations with one another to ultimately rekindle their affections. So you'll note that this thesis is very specific, so I know exactly what we're going to be talking about as I read your paper, and that is great. That's what we want. I don't want any surprises. So instead of, don't think of it like a movie where, you want to save kind of some plot twist for the end. Don't worry about surprising your reader. That's actually not what you want. It makes a reader feel good to know that they know that you're headed somewhere and they know where you're going. So based on this thesis, I can guess that we're first going to be talking about Linda and Ruth as the emotional centers of their families. So I'm guessing the first part of their paper is going to be kind of comparing these two, showing that they're both emotional rocks in their families. And so I see that right here. Throughout both plays, Ruth and Linda operate as the peacekeepers within their families. So this would be called a topic sentence. Okay, so you've got your thesis here at the end of your introductory paragraph. And then this starts off kind of the first main point that this student is making. And right off the bat, this ties right back in with the thesis. And that's what we want. We want organized, and we want it to everything in your paper should point back to this thesis. I've also highlighted in green interactions with the text, and you may have seen some of that as far as feedback from me. If I've said, I'd like to see more interaction with the text, this is an example of what I'm looking for. In a literary analysis, we are not just initiating a topic that we can kind of just talk about. So in this paper, we're not just going to be talking about marriage. We're talking about marriage that we see in these two texts. And so what you are going to have to do is support your thesis with proof. So it's almost scientific in a way. So you can tell me that your thesis is the case, but I can believe you and I can get on board when you prove it to me. So what I'm seeing here is a lot of interaction with the text. So I'm seeing lots of quotes here. And do you see she kind of weaves in and out of these quotes, showing how they support her main point. So here we scroll down, we've got our second point here. Linda chooses time and time again to ignore or not confront enough when it comes to Willie's problems of dementia and suicidal thoughts. So now we've looked at both women as peacekeepers, and now we're looking at just Linda, kind of her dysfunction. And then we've got some examples here in the text of her dysfunction. How could I mention it to him? Again, she's not wanting to be confrontational, so this is supporting her main point here. And then now we look at Ruth. And now, how does Ruth interact with her family? Okay, so she's got a good for nothing loud mouth, is what she tells Walter. So obviously she's more outspoken. So here's examples of her being outspoken. So you'll see there's lots and lots of quotes here. Your paper should be littered with quotes from the text. I'd like to see lots and lots of evidence, because that is really very persuasive, and that's ultimately what you're wanting to do. Here's the last point of her paper, and again, more support. And then we come to the last paragraph here of this paper, and we have sort of a restatement of the thesis. So you're not going to say it word for word, but you're going to kind of restate it here, kind of solidifying it. It's kind of basically, in essence, saying, okay, I've talked to you about this topic. Here was my thesis again. And again, this is where I stand. And really kind of your one last try to persuade your reader to be on your side and to agree with you. So here's a great example of a literary analysis. I also just wanted to show you in your composition assignments that you just completed, it asked you to have some commentary on your quotes. And so this was a good example of that. And this is what I'm wanting to see in your papers. And you'll see kind of the italicized things here are commentary. So this was talking about Hemingway's work here, and talks about those hills. They were white in the sun, and the country was brown and dry. So there's the quote. And then she takes time to go through and to really think about what that quote means and what its implications are. So don't just quote from the text and then move on and assume that we are connecting the dots that you want us to connect. You kind of have to go above and beyond to make sure your reader is fully on board and fully understanding the purpose of that quote and why you've used it in the text. So in this case, the description gives us a stark contrast of the hills and what surrounds them. White is a color that invokes a sense of purity and good. Brown is dirty and tainted. White is a color, there is no mention in this short story that the man and the girl are married, and yet they find themselves expecting a child. So here we're connecting it now to kind of the underlying issues. And so just make sure that your reader is on board with you and that you've completely explained the significance of the quotes that you're using. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that these successful papers do not ever use first-person point of view. And by that I mean nowhere in here does it say, I think, I believe. There's no personal stories in here. That's because this is a literary analysis. Now, first-person point of view would be fine if you're talking about writing a narrative or a memoir or something that's very that's asking you to be personal and kind of inject your personal feelings and experiences. But this particular type of paper is almost scientific. You're looking at a text, you're making an argument about the text, you're supporting that argument, and ending with a strong conclusion. And nowhere in there should we have anything that says, I think, I believe, I feel. I want you to get in the habit of writing in a way to where your writing is persuasive and you don't have to persuade me from a personal place. And so that will make your writing stronger. It will make you more believable. Instead of just saying, I believe this happened, just say, this happened. And you know what? Sometimes when we say, I believe, I think, those are actually ways of kind of apologizing for something bold that we're going to say. And don't apologize. Just put it out there and be strong and support it with with those lines from the text and show us how they're important. So I hope this helped you in terms of content. I would love to help you with your thesis. If you have questions about your thesis, I'll be looking at those on the discussion board. If you have questions about how to outline, I highly suggest outlining. Get your kind of a thesis in mind and then write out your main points and then what you're going to use to support them. And that way, when you start writing, it's very quick and it's very easy and it's, again, very organized. So if you have any questions, please email me. I would love to help, but I hope this helps you in terms of content for your literary analysis.